Alexandra Montenegro, an arrogant millionaire, sends a wedding invitation to his ex-girlfriend with the intention of humiliating her. But when she shows up with 3 identical children, what he discovers about her past will make his life take an unexpected turn. You won't believe what happens next. Alexandra Montenegro twisted the engagement ring on his finger as he stared at the elegant gold card on his desk, his smile curved with a mix of satisfaction and cruel anticipation. Years ago, Camila Duarte had left him at a time when he was just beginning to build his empire. Now it was his chance to show her what she had lost. He looked up at his personal assistant. "Make sure he gets this in person. I want him to see the name on the invitation." The woman nodded and walked out of the office with quick steps. Alexandra leaned back in his leather chair, feeling the adrenaline rush through his veins. In a few days, the woman he once believed could love him would see his absolute triumph. Camila held the envelope with trembling fingers. Her name was engraved in elegant calligraphy, and beneath it, Alexandra's name, next to that of his future wife, Isabella Costa. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been years since her story with Alexandra had ended abruptly, leaving her with a weight he could never have imagined. She pressed her lips together, torn between pride and uncertainty. "Mom, what's that?" a little voice asked beside her. Camila looked down and found 3 pairs of bright eyes watching her curiously. "It's an invitation, love." The children looked at each other with the innocence of those who do not fully understand the situation. Camila took a deep breath. She knew Alexandra hadn't invited her out of kindness. She knew his ego, his desire to see her regret the past. But for the first time in a long time, she felt in control of the situation. She carefully folded the invitation and put it in her bag. "Come on, little ones. It seems we have an important event to attend." When his assistant confirmed that Camila had accepted the invitation, Alexandra felt a tingle of satisfaction. "Perfect," he whispered, raising his wine glass to toast himself. The night of her wedding would not only be her moment of glory, it would also be the moment when Camila Duarte would understand, without a doubt, that she had made the worst mistake of her life. The grand ballroom of the Imperial Hotel was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, reflecting golden light onto tables adorned with exquisite floral arrangements. Every detail spoke of luxury, of grandeur. Just as Alexandra Montenegro had planned. Guests trickled in, dressed in designer attire, exchanging compliments and comments about the opulence of the event. Montenegro spared no expense. A man in a black suit whispered to his wife, "Of course not. It's his style. Besides, he wants everyone to know that he has won in life." Alexandre, dressed in an impeccable black tuxedo, smiled triumphantly as he shook hands and received congratulations. His fiancée, Isabella Costa, looked radiant in an elegantly cut white dress. She was the perfect woman for him, sophisticated, from an influential family and with an impeccable image. Everything was in its place, or almost everything. As the ceremony drew closer, Alexandre kept sneaking glances toward the main entrance. He knew Camila would come. She had accepted the invitation, and he was eager to see her reaction to witnessing all he had built. The murmurs of the crowd suddenly intensified. The huge oak doors slowly opened. Camila Duarte appeared on the threshold with a firm and elegant posture, dressed in a navy blue dress that highlighted her figure with a simplicity that contrasted with the extravagance of the event. She walked with confidence, but she was not alone. 3 children, dressed in identical outfits, accompanied her. The air seemed to stop in the room. The attendants began to whisper amongst themselves, their gazes flickering between Alexandra and the children. There was something disturbing about that image, something impossible to ignore. Alexandre felt the ground shake beneath his feet. His proud expression froze in a grimace of disbelief. His mind tried to find a logical explanation, but the reality was all too clear. The 3 children were identical to him. The murmur in the room turned into a deafening hum. Some guests discreetly took out their phones to capture the scene. From her position at the altar, Isabella noticed it too. Her eyes widened in horror as she held Alexandra's hand tightly. "Who are those children?" Her voice was barely a tense whisper. Alexandra did not answer. He couldn't. Camila continued to walk slowly, with the same serenity with which she had crossed that door. She stopped right in the middle of the room in front of him. "Good evening, Alexandra," he said, with an enigmatic smile. The silence in the room was absolute. For the first time in years, Alexandra Montenegro was at a loss for words. The silence in the room became unbearable. All eyes were fixed on Alexandra, Camila, and the three children who looked like miniature replicas of him. Alexandra's heart was pounding furiously in his chest. Every muscle in his body tensed as he advanced towards Camila with firm steps, driven by a mixture of disbelief and suppressed rage. "What the hell does this mean, Camila?" His voice came out deep, with an edge of menace. Camila didn't flinch. She held his gaze with a calm that drove him even further mad. "It means exactly what you're seeing," he replied calmly without removing his enigmatic smile. Alexander looked at the children. They were identical to him when he was a child. The same dark eyes, the same sharp chin, even the same impatient frown on the youngest. His breathing became erratic. "This has to be a joke," he growled, running his hand through his hair. "It isn't," she said, just as coldly. The guests barely dared to breathe. The scene was worthy of a soap opera. Some whispered with their eyes shining with morbid curiosity. Others simply watched in complete shock. Isabella Costa, Alexandra's girlfriend, was quick to react. She walked towards them with the elegance of a woman who refused to lose control in public, but her eyes betrayed the trembling inside. "Alexandra," he said in a firm voice, trying to hide his anxiety. "What is going on here? Who are these children?" He opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. His blood was boiling in his veins. He glared at Camila with a fury he could barely contain. "If this is a game of yours to ruin my wedding, believe me, you made the worst mistake of your life," he whispered through his teeth. Camila raised an eyebrow, amused. "A game?" he repeated with irony. "If you want to know the truth, you just have to look closely at these children." Alexander clenched his fists. Of course he was looking at them, and every second that passed only made the thought more terrifying. "It can't be," he whispered, more to himself. Isabella felt the world shake beneath her feet. Her gaze shifted from Alexandra to the children, and her heart sank with a horrible suspicion. "Alexandra," his voice trembled slightly, "tell me this is not what it seems." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The murmur among the guests increased, creating an echo of speculation. Some were already jumping to conclusions, while the journalists invited to the event took notes with greedy expressions. Camila sighed and crouched down next to the children, tenderly arranging one of their hair. "I didn't come here to cause a scandal, Alexandra," he said calmly. "I came because I had to, and because they deserve answers too." Her words hit him like a punch. Isabella, standing beside him, felt her throat closing up. Her pride and dignity were about to be trampled on in front of everyone. "I need an explanation," he demanded in a small voice. But Alexandra Montenegro no longer knew if he was ready to face the truth. The air in the room was thick, charged with tension. No one dared move. The murmurs among the guests were a constant hum, but all Alexander could hear was the thunderous beating of his own heart. Camila stood her ground, her serene expression contrasting with the storm of emotions in Alexandra's eyes. Finally, she broke the silence. "Alexandra, do you really need me to say this out loud?" he asked with a barely perceptible smile. He felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts were screaming at him what his mind refused to accept. "Sir, no, it can't be," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed his denial as they focused on the children. Camila sighed patiently, then placed a hand on one of the little one's shoulder. "Meet Tiago, Lorenzo, and Matias. They are your sons." A collective gasp filled the room. Alexander felt the world tilt beneath his feet. All his control, his superiority, was gone in a single second. A searing heat rose to his face, followed by a freezing cold that ran down his spine. Isabella, who had remained motionless until now, took a step back, unable to process what she had just heard. "You're... what?" her voice broke. Camila nodded calmly. "Your children, Alexandra," she repeated firmly. "They are 5 years old." The silence in the room turned into a storm of gas and intense whispers. Alexandre felt his chest tighten. 5 years. He did the math in his head, and the result took his breath away. 5 years ago, he and Camila had broken up. It was at the height of his ambition, when his business was just getting off the ground, and he couldn't afford distractions. He had convinced himself that cutting her out of his life had been the right decision, but I never knew she was pregnant. Why didn't you ever tell me? He growled, his jaw clenched. Camilla looked at him with an unfathomable expression. Did you give me the chance to do it? His voice was soft, but each word cut like a knife. You left me no choice, Alexander. You left me behind without looking back. Alexander's eyes burned with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something deeper. Fear. Fear that he had made an irreparable mistake. Isabella, who was still trying to catch her breath, glared at him. Is that true? His voice vibrated with indignation. You have 3 children and you never knew? The journalists present did not miss a single detail of the scene. Some guest cameras were already discreetly recording. This can't be happening, Alexander whispered, feeling his world, so perfectly constructed, begin to crumble. Camilla straightened her shoulders and held Alexander's gaze one last time. Now you know, he said calmly. What you do with this truth is up to you. And with that phrase, Alexander Montenegro knew that his life would never be the same. The silence was replaced by a whirlwind of murmurs and exclamations. Isabella trembled with rage. The guests exchanged knowing glances, and the journalists eagerly noted down every word. But Alexander only saw Camilla and the children. I'm not going to accept this without proof, he growled, his voice filled with frustration and doubt. I want a DNA test. Camilla didn't even blink. Of course, he replied with absolute calm. I have nothing to hide. The firmness in her voice unnerved Alexandra. Part of him expected her to hesitate, to show nervousness. But no. Camilla spoke with a certainty that chilled his blood. Isabella turned abruptly to Alexandra, her face contorted with humiliation. This is ridiculous, he snapped, his voice shaking. How can you allow this woman to ruin our wedding with such a scandal? Alexandra ran a hand over his face, trying to regain control of the situation. It's not that simple, Isabella, he said through gritted teeth. If there's a chance those children are mine, I need to know. Isabella's indignation grew. A possibility. Look at them, for God's sake. They're like copies of you. Isabella's words bounced around in his head like a haunting echo. He knew it. Deep down, he knew it. But admitting it meant accepting that he had failed at something bigger than business, his own personal life. I'm going to get tested, Alexandre said, his voice grave. If the results confirm that they are my children, I will take responsibility. Isabella glared at him. If that happens, don't count on me, he whispered venomously. Alexandre clenched his fists. He knew his relationship with Isabella was faltering, but for the first time he couldn't focus on saving her. Something more important was at stake. Camilla watched the scene in silence. She hadn't come to destroy the wedding. She didn't want revenge. She had only wanted Alexandre to know the truth. Whenever you want, Alexandre, he said in a calm voice. Take the test you need. With that sentence, the conversation was settled. But in Alexandre's mind, the war was just beginning. Hours later, when the room had emptied and the whispers became headlines, Isabella and Alexandre had their last confrontation. I'm not going to marry a man who suddenly has 3 children with another woman, Isabella snapped, her eyes bloodshot with rage. Alexandre sighed, tired. This is not something I can ignore, Isabella. Then don't expect me to do it, she replied coldly. I'm not willing to be the woman who agrees to this. She looked at him one last time with a mixture of contempt and disappointment, and then left the room without looking back. Alexandre felt like he had lost something valuable. But when his gaze fell on the door through which Camilla and the children had left, he knew that the most important thing was yet to be discovered. The clinic waiting room was completely silent, save for the sound of the air conditioning and the soft murmur of the receptionist. Alexandre drummed his fingers against the armrest of his chair, impatient. Across from him, Camilla remained calm, her expression impassive. The 3 children sat beside him, swinging their feet, not fully understanding the magnitude of what was happening. You don't have to act like this is just another formality in your life, Alexandre growled, unable to contain his frustration. Camilla turned her head and looked at him with a slight smile. And how do you expect me to act? Cry? Scream? Make a scene? His tone was soft, but sharp as a razor. I didn't come here for you, Alexandra. I came for them. He shifted in his seat. He hated how she always found a way to disarm him with her words. "Tell me the truth," he suddenly murmured. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" For the first time in the entire conversation, Camilla's expression hardened. "Do you want to know?" "Very well." He took a deep breath, as if he were deciding how far he wanted to open that wound. "When I found out I was pregnant, I went looking for you," she began, her voice heavy with suppressed emotion. "But you had already disappeared. You weren't answering my calls. Your assistant made it clear that you were busy building your empire." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't remember receiving any calls. But at that time, his only priority had been work. "I didn't want to beg you," Camilla continued. "I saw how you were obsessed with success, how nothing else mattered. I didn't want to bring my children into the world with a father who wasn't there. So I moved on without you." The silence between them became thick, almost unbearable. Alexandra clenched his fists. "What if I had wanted to be there?" Camilla let out a bitter laugh. "Do you really think you would have chosen to be a father at that time?" He opened his mouth, but he didn't have an answer. In that time, he had put everything aside for his ambition. Maybe yes, maybe not. One of the boys, Tiago, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, when will we leave?" Camilla stroked his hair tenderly and smiled at him. "Soon, darling." Alexandra looked at them with a strange feeling in his chest. She seemed so natural with them, so sure of her role as mother. And he felt like a stranger in his own story. The doctor appeared at the door with an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Montenegro, the results will be ready in a few hours." Alexandra nodded. Camilla stood up and took the children by the hand. "It doesn't matter what that paper says, Alexandra," she said before leaving. "They don't need proof to know who you are." And with that sentence, she walked away, leaving Alexandra alone with his inner storm. The clinic room was plunged into a tense silence. Alexandra held the envelope with the results in his hands, but he did not open it. His breathing was heavy, his thoughts a chaos. The doctor cleared his throat impatiently. "Mr. Montenegro, you can open it whenever you want." Alexander swallowed and, with stiff movements, slid the paper out of the envelope. His eyes scanned the lines of text, but his mind already knew the answer before he read it. Probability of paternity, 99%. His fingers tightened around the paper. He felt a lump in his throat, an unfamiliar, suffocating emotion that left him breathless. The children were hers, of course they were. He had known it from the first moment he saw them cross the threshold of the church. "Congratulations, Mr. Montenegro," said the doctor in a neutral tone. "It seems that your family has just grown." Family. The word weighed on his chest like a rock. Without saying a word, he stood up and walked out of the clinic. He needed air. He needed to think. Hours later, the news was already in all the media. Millionaire discovers he has 3 children on his wedding day. Scandal at the wedding of tycoon Alexandre Montenegro. The ex arrives with 3 children identical to him. Who is Camilla Duarte, the woman who challenged one of the most powerful men in the country? The headlines were a reflection of his personal disaster. Alexandre was in his office, a glass of whiskey between his fingers, looking out the window at the city. His phone vibrated on the desk, but he didn't need to see the name on the screen. He knew who it was. Isabella. Days had passed since the scandal, and they had not spoken again. Finally, he answered. "Tell me." His voice sounded cold, distant. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Alexandra." Isabella's voice was sharp. "I saw it in the media. I guess you already have your answers." "Yes," was the only thing he answered. There was a tense silence. Then she sighed. "You know this means we're over, right?" He closed his eyes. He wasn't surprised. "I know. I can't be with a man who drags around a scandal like that. It's not what I want for my life," she declared coldly. "And it's not what my parents expected either." Alexandre let out a dry laugh. It had always been like this. Everything had to fit into the perfect image Isabella was constructing. "So, I guess this is our farewell," he said, with a calm that surprised him. "I guess so." And the call ended. Alexandre remained silent, staring at his reflection in the window. All his life, he had believed that his greatest fear was losing his status, his power. But at that moment, he understood what truly terrified him. It was like losing something much more valuable without even realizing it. Alexander parked his car in front of a modest house on the outskirts of the city. It was not the kind of neighborhood he was used to, but there he was, standing in front of the door, feeling an uneasiness he had not experienced in years. He took a deep breath and knocked gently. A few seconds later, the door opened, revealing Camilla with a neutral expression. "I didn't expect to see you so soon," she said, crossing her arms. "Can we talk?" Alexander asked, his tone more serious than usual. Camilla studied him for a moment before opening the door fully. "Happens." The interior of the house was warm and cozy, with toys scattered in one corner and photographs on the walls. Alexander noticed a picture of Camilla with the children on the beach, their smiles full of life. A weight settled on his chest. From the hallway, the three children appeared. They stood still when they saw Alexandra, observing him with the curiosity typical of children. "Guys, say hello," Camilla said softly. The children looked at each other before speaking in an almost synchronized murmur. "Hello," Alexandra swallowed. He didn't know what he was expecting, but the emptiness between them was evident. "Hello," he replied with an attempt at a smile. Tiago, the oldest by a few minutes, frowned. "Why did you come?" The question was simple, but Alexander felt it pierce his chest. "I wanted to see them, meet them." Matthias, the most mischievous, tilted his head. "Are you our dad?" Camilla pressed her lips together, ready to intervene if necessary. Alexander crouched down to be at her level. "Yes, I am." The children did not seem impressed. They simply looked at each other, as if sharing a secret. "Mom never talked about you," Lorenzo said with the innocent frankness of a child. Alexander felt something break inside him. "I know, and that was my fault." Camilla watched the scene in silence. Alexander was not used to feeling vulnerable, but there he was, on his knees, trying to reach three little ones who barely recognized him. "I don't want to force them into anything," he said sincerely. "I just want to get to know them." Tiago, the most reserved, remained thoughtful before shrugging his shoulders. "Do you play soccer?" The question took him by surprise. "I haven't done it for a long time, but I can try." Matthias smiled. "If you play badly, we will tell you." Alexander let out a small laugh. For the first time in a long time, he felt like money and success meant nothing at the moment, because there was something more important in front of him. Alexander had never been a man of second chances. In business, a mistake was costly. In his personal life, he simply avoided what he could not control. But with his children, he did not have the option of running away. That afternoon, after their first meeting, he returned home with something new on his mind: the need to make up for lost time. The next few days were a challenge. Alexander tried to reach out to the children with small gestures, bringing them toys, asking about their drawings, trying to fit into their routine. But they weren't used to him. "Are you always going to come, or just because Mom told you?" Tiago asked one afternoon, with the maturity that only an observant child could have. Alexander was silent for a moment before answering. "I'm coming because I want to." The answer seemed to surprise Tiago, but he didn't say anything else. Camilla, who was watching them from the kitchen, sighed. "You can't expect them to accept you overnight," she said, crossing her arms. "They grew up without a father, Alexander. To them, you're a stranger." He nodded. He knew, but he wasn't going to give up. "I'm going to show them that they can trust me." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "And you are willing to change your life for that?" That question struck him. For years, his routine revolved around meetings, investments, business trips. His entire world was his company. But now, for the first time, he hesitated. A week later, in Alexander's office, his assistant walked in with a folder and a worried expression. "Mr. Montenegro, you have canceled 3 important meetings this week. Investors are asking if something is going on." He ran a hand over his face. Of course they were worried. He'd never let anything go by before. "Reschedule them." "Sorry?" "Reschedule them. I'll take care of that later." The assistant blinked in surprise. "May I ask what matter is more urgent than this?" Alexander exhaled, looking out the window. "My children." The woman nodded slowly and left without asking any more questions. Alexandra remained silent. He had spent years building his empire, But now he understood that the real challenge was not in his business. I was learning how to be a father. That night, when he arrived at Camilla's house to pick up the children and take them to dinner, something was different. Lorenzo showed him a drawing where he appeared with his brothers, and also with him. "Today at school, they asked us to draw our family," said the boy, shrugging his shoulders. "And Mom said that you are our dad." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. It was a small step, but it was a start, and for the first time in his life, he knew he was walking in the right direction. The sun was beginning to set over the city, turning the sky orange and violet. Alexander watched from his office, his thoughts scattered. He no longer felt so sure of what he had built, of what he had sacrificed to get this far. He had wasted so much time, but now there was something more important than all that. He closed his computer and stood up. He didn't need to be in his office. He didn't need to be among the luxuries that surrounded him. What he needed was outside those walls, in the house that had once been a foreign place to him, but was now beginning to feel more like a home. When she arrived at Camilla's house, the children were already ready to go out. Tiago was with his soccer ball, Lorenzo was checking his toys, and Matias was playing with a ball. "Let's go, Dad?" Tiago asked, his tone no longer so distant. Alexandre approached and, without thinking, crouched down to her level. "Yeah, let's go. But first, can I kick that ball?" Tiago handed him the ball with a shy smile. "You have to be fast if you want to beat us." Alexandre laughed genuinely. Somehow he had begun to feel that the words he had said weeks ago about wanting to be a present father were not just empty promises. There was something in him that really wanted that change. Camilla appeared at the door, watching them with an expression between surprised and satisfied. "I never thought I'd see you play football," he said, crossing his arms. "I never thought I'd care," Alexander replied with a frank smile. The afternoon passed in a simple way. Laughter, games, the occasional fall, but above all a feeling that, little by little, he was building something new, something he never imagined he needed. Tiago, the most reserved, remained thoughtful before shrugging his shoulders. "Do you play soccer?" The question took him by surprise. "I haven't done it for a long time, but I can try." Matias smiled. "If you play badly, we will tell you." Alexander let out a small laugh. For the first time in a long time, he felt like money and success meant nothing at the moment, because there was something more important in front of him. Alexander had never been a man of second chances. In business, a mistake was costly. In his personal life, he simply avoided what he could not control. But with his children, he did not have the option of running away. That afternoon, after their first meeting, he returned home with something new on his mind: the need to make up for lost time. The next few days were a challenge. Alexander tried to reach out to the children with small gestures, bringing them toys, asking about their drawings, trying to fit into their routine. But they weren't used to him. "Are you always going to come, or just because Mom told you?" Tiago asked one afternoon, with the maturity that only an observant child could have. Alexander was silent for a moment before answering. "I'm coming because I want to." The answer seemed to surprise Tiago, but he didn't say anything else. Camilla, who was watching them from the kitchen, sighed. "You can't expect them to accept you overnight," she said, crossing her arms. "They grew up without a father, Alexander. To them, you're a stranger." He nodded. He knew, but he wasn't going to give up. "I'm going to show them that they can trust me." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "And you are willing to change your life for that?" That question struck him. For years, his routine revolved around meetings, investments, business trips. His entire world was his company. But now, for the first time, he hesitated. A week later, in Alexander's office, his assistant walked in with a folder and a worried expression. "Mr. Montenegro, you have canceled 3 important meetings this week. Investors are asking if something is going on." He ran a hand over his face. Of course they were worried. He'd never let anything go by before. "Reschedule them." "Sorry?" "Reschedule them. I'll take care of that later." The assistant blinked in surprise. "May I ask what matter is more urgent than this?" Alexander exhaled, looking out the window. "My children." The woman nodded slowly and left without asking any more questions. Alexandre remained silent. He had spent years building his empire, but now he understood that the real challenge was not in his business. I was learning how to be a father. That night, when he arrived at Camilla's house to pick up the children and take them to dinner, something was different. Lorenzo showed him a drawing where he appeared with his brothers, and also with him. "Today at school, they asked us to draw our family," said the boy, shrugging his shoulders. "And Mom said that you are our dad." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. It was a small step, but it was a start, and for the first time in his life, he knew he was walking in the right direction. The sun was beginning to set over the city, turning the sky orange and violet. Alexander watched from his office, his thoughts scattered. He no longer felt so sure of what he had built, of what he had sacrificed to get this far. He had wasted so much time, but now there was something more important than all that. He closed his computer and stood up. He didn't need to be in his office. He didn't need to be among the luxuries that surrounded him. What he needed was outside those walls, in the house that had once been a foreign place to him, but was now beginning to feel more like a home. When she arrived at Camilla's house, the children were already ready to go out. Tiago was with his soccer ball, Lorenzo was checking his toys, and Matias was playing with a ball. "Let's go, Dad?" Tiago asked, his tone no longer so distant. Alexandre approached and, without thinking, crouched down to her level. "Yeah, let's go. But first, can I kick that ball?" Tiago handed him the ball with a shy smile. "You have to be fast if you want to beat us." Alexandre laughed genuinely. Somehow he had begun to feel that the words he had said weeks ago about wanting to be a present father were not just empty promises. There was something in him that really wanted that change. Camilla appeared at the door, watching them with an expression between surprised and satisfied. "I never thought I'd see you play football," he said, crossing his arms. "I never thought I'd care," Alexander replied with a frank smile. The afternoon passed in a simple way. Laughter, games, the occasional fall, but above all a feeling that, little by little, he was building something new, something he never imagined he needed. That evening, as they ate dinner together, Alexander looked at the children. They had begun to let go of their distrust of him, although there was still a barrier that he could not cross overnight. However, he no longer felt that his efforts were in vain. He looked at Camilla, who was sitting in front of him, watching the children with a calmness he had not seen before. "I haven't asked you before," Alexandre said, breaking the silence. "What do you expect from all this?" Camilla looked at him for a long moment. "I hope they have a family that loves them, and that the same mistakes of the past are not repeated." Alexandre nodded. "Me too. I'm not going to make that happen." And as the children talked and played with each other, Alexander knew that, although the future remained uncertain, he was willing to fight for them. For this family that, in some way, had become his, the future was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Alexander Montenegro felt that, perhaps, he could have it all. Alexander Montenegro's story shows us that sometimes material success is not enough to fill the emptiness inside. Despite having everything that money can buy, he realized too late that what really mattered in his life were human relationships and the unconditional love of a family. What would you have done if you were in his place? Would you have been able to accept your mistakes and fight for what really matters? Click on the video that appears on the screen to follow your path of self-knowledge and discover how you can make decisions that lead you to a more fulfilling life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue learning and reflecting on what really matters in life. See you in the next video.